What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Fantasy Golf Bag Podcast. I'm your host, Redkacheek, and we are 1 week away from the U.S. Open. Pretty fun stretch of golf that we just had, and then obviously going into some good events with the U.S. Open and the British Open. We're recording on Monday, so the longest day in golf, which is the final sectional qualifying for the U.S. Open going on right now, which is a fun event to follow, multiple events to follow. Guys got to play 36, and depending on the site, it's around 4 or 5 that get in to the U.S. Open. So it's a pretty exciting deal. Honestly, the U.S. Open qualifying in general, I wish, I guess I don't really wish, I guess just an idea if, the Masters had a qualifying. So for the U.S. Open, it's like $200 to enter. Pretty much anybody can enter it. They have a handicap restriction, but you can also enter as a professional, and there's no handicap. And just plenty of people mess around with their handicaps and can get into the qualifying. But it's honestly pretty cool because you play 18 holes, finish in the top 4 or 5, or top 3, depending if it's a small site at the local qualifying, and then you go to sectionals. And if you can get through 36 holes, finishing in the top 5. You're into the U.S. Open. So it's a pretty cool deal from a golf perspective or a golfer's perspective that, honestly, playing in a major championship is really 3 rounds away. The cool idea I've had a long time ago, it's never going to happen, but with it being $200 for the U.S. Open and they get 10,000 people to enter, you could probably have the Masters do some type of crazy qualifying, and it'd be like $1,000 to enter, and they'd still get 5,000 people that would enter it. Honestly, the Q school costs, I think it's $2,500 for pre-qualifying and then an extra $2,500 for the remaining stages. So it's like 5,000 up front. And they get, several thousand people to enter that. So I'm sure they could do the same thing with the Masters and just charge some obscene number. But yeah, the US Open's just been pretty cool to let guys basically 3 rounds, and you're playing, back in the day, you were playing with Tiger Woods. That was a big deal. Now you're playing with Rory and Scotty and all those guys. So pretty exciting if you're following along. There's plenty of Twitter accounts kind of tracking that. I think Monday Q and Golf Channel, USGA, etc. And then you can go on their website and track along. But it's just fun to watch. And you'll see guys come out of nowhere, and there's a lot of storylines around guys qualifying, haven't played golf in a long time. I think John Peterson's leading the Ohio one right now, and he got his amateur status back last year or this year, and he was co-leading the U.S. Open 7, 8, 9 years ago, whenever it was, and now he has a good chance of going back to Oakmont. And who knows? It could just be like, to me at least, from a golfer's perspective, like the fairy tale stories don't really happen, so it's cool to see potentially something like a guy coming out of retirement and then contending for a major would be cool. And if he's going up against Scotty or Rory, to me, that's even better. So we'll see how it shakes out. But this week, we're talking about the RBC Canadian Open being played at TPC Toronto. This is the North Course at Osprey Valley. It's a new course for the PGA Tour. I think they've hosted a few PGA Tour Americas events there. They played something else there. I can't remember. It was some mini tour or national event, something like that for Canada. Looks like a pretty cool golf course, pretty fun. This is a picture of a couple of the holes. I don't know the whole layouts or like the whole mapping very well, but this is the look of it. So pretty cool, kind of nestled in a forest there. But we're going to pull up a couple tweets and then talk through the golf course to kind of dissect it the best that we can, being a new golf course without data behind it. So from a difficulty standpoint, this is similar to what we saw at the Philadelphia Cricket Club. Typically, when the PGA Tour goes to a new golf course, they set it up too easy, or they're just a little bit lax on making it play tough or getting away from. Not even getting away from. Memorial plays tough, and it's not getting away from anybody. It's just a very difficult golf course with thick rough. From what I understand, there's some rough here, but I also understand that it's a pretty wide golf course, resembling TPC Craig Ranch of all places. So kind of grip it and rip it and have some longer approach shots. So it is kind of on the longer side, but we can talk through the golf course. So what we have at Fantasy Golf Bag, we have some new stuff I'll talk about here in just a second. But for like the Course Preview Pro, which you guys are accustomed to seeing with all the data for the golf course and lead-in form and stuff like that, obviously that doesn't exist because there's been no winners at this golf course. Again, for RBC Canadian Open, sure. But I'm mostly concerned with the golf course, not the event. So we don't have any of that data to use, but we pulled in, obviously it's par 70, 73.89. So in my opinion, on the longer side, and we'll see that kind of shake out here in just a little bit. Average par 3, 191, average par 4, 458, average par 5, 561. I'll also pull up the scorecard. This is what that looks like. I'll make it a little bit bigger. Some really long par fours. So like you can see here on the back nine, 16 and 17, 513, 530. So definitely add to the scorecard length. The par threes, there's a couple longer ones. Number 7 is 237. Number 11 is 225. So the par 3 distance, can add, an extra 100 yards right there instead of 175. Playing 225 and 237 adds an extra 100 yards. So a lot of the distance is in a couple of the long par 4s and 2 of those long par 3s. There are some shorter par 4s in here. You can see number 12 and apparently number 6 is drivable. So I don't know if 12 is drivable. 375 is a little bit deep. But supposedly 350, they can move it up, or even at the back tee is drivable. And then 375 is pretty short for today's standards. And then the par 5s are pretty much all in the same ballpark, the 2 of them. 581 finishing hole, 542 starting hole. 542 is pretty short for a par 5, but a pretty good array of holes, I would say. I really like the starting par 5 and I like the ending par 5. That's kind of cool. I really do. Depending on the golf course, a finishing par 4 that's difficult is fine. Finishing 18 on a par 5 makes it really fun, just from the sense that someone could make an eagle, a birdie, a par, and they lose a shot or two, a bogey even. So a par 5 finishing hole makes it fun, I think, for an event as it finishes up. And then, we got another long par 4 here, number 13, 526. So yeah, a good handful of 500 plus par 4s. So definitely on the longer side. What I wanted to bring up was Eric Patterson. He's a Canadian golf writer. You guys are all familiar with him. I think he was on the Pat Mayo's podcast this week. He's been on a bunch of different shows over the years. Very knowledgeable in the space and obviously has experience up in this area for Canada. So he laid out a couple of the ideas here, and the ones I wanted to kind of highlight, and I'll pull this up so you can kind of read through it a little bit. And obviously, I would recommend you follow EPAT Golf if you don't already. But the things that I was most interested in, and it doesn't always shake out this way, but this gives us at least an idea. And Eric's sharp, so like this isn't going to be misled from some guy that's a hack thinking holes are long when they really aren't. So what he kind of mentioned was it's a driver-heavy golf course. 2 par 4s, less than driver. 6 is potentially drivable. Otherwise, they're laying up. Okay. And 10 is a less than driver hole. What was 10? 416 par 4. Okay. So there's probably some trouble out there, and they have to stay short of that. No big deal. So he didn't mention 12. I don't know what they do there. Let's see. Wide driving corridors. It's a fancy way, I assume, of saying just driving areas. There's not a lot of trouble besides the rough, fairway into rough, and then nothing else. Not a lot of hazards or issues with trees, stuff like that. He says never feels tight and narrow. So yeah, from a driving standpoint, it seems like driver heavy and not a lot of trouble besides the rough, which they do say they have it at 3.75 inches. We'll see if that holds true. I mean, that's pretty hefty. 4-inch bluegrass almost. 3 to 4 inches bluegrass would be pretty good. At least that would tame a little bit of the bomb and gouge, but we'll see. The other thing, so because 315 average off the tee, okay, I don't know if it's playing soft or not, but like 315 is definitely on the higher end of an average off the tee as far as driving distance goes. He says 8 approach shots, par 3s included, are over 175. 6 approaches will be over 200. So like even with a 315 average, which I consider high, Um, 315 average for like Rory, definitely doable. For the field as an average, that seems a bit steep, but that gives you an idea that a lot of the approaches are going to be approaching 200 yards and over 200 yards. So that's pretty good. He does say if the 300 average off the tee, with that, you'll have 10 approach shots over 175. And then obviously you'll have additional over 200. So both par fives are reachable. The birdie holes are the par fives, obviously, and the shortish par fours. So number 6, 10, and 12. And then you got a short par 3, hole 14. Yeah, 144 and 158 on 4. I mean, par 3s are weird, are just weird. I'm sure you guys have played scrambles, and it's honestly no different from a golfer's perspective. Like, it's much easier to birdie a par 5 than for some reason birdieing short par 3s. These guys are good. So obviously these are still birdie holes, but they definitely don't make as many birdies on these holes. And if you've played in scrambles, you'd kind of get that idea, that same concept, because birdieing any of the par 4s somehow in a scramble is easy. The par 3s are always the ones that get you. You're trying to make a 20-footer or a 15-footer. So I do think they're birdie holes, but I'm doubt they're going to play under par, or they'll play as much under par as the par 5s, I should say. So not a ton of trouble. Bogeys will come from the poor long iron shots. Makes sense. A lot of 200 plus iron shots. You're going to miss a lot of greens. Guys don't hit a ton of greens over 200, even being some of the best in the world. Very different than the last couple events for the Canadian Open. Obviously, Hamilton was very short and narrow, or not short, but definitely narrow. I don't recall Oakdale, and I'm pretty sure St. George's was in the same ballpark for being kind of a narrow Canadian golf course, is what the theme was. It seemed like for like a decade there. He mentions the best comp is TPC San Antonio, and also has some TPC Craig Ranch feels as far as the bomb it away idea. So that helps us a little bit. We get an idea for a lot of drivers. Check. We can use that in our IQ tools. And then we have a reasonable expectation for most approach shots over 175 and a good handful over 200. So we can use that in the approach IQ as well. So that is kind of where we're going to start. So without going into all the course stats that we typically do, what I'm going to do here is we're going to run a couple items. So we'll do driving IQ and we'll do approach IQ. And, we do a pro video for all of the Fantasy Golf Bag members. We basically do a combination course fit model with driving IQ and approach IQ, which I like quite a bit. Seems like a pretty popular video every week. So for this, we're just going to do them 2 separate. As always, if you are a Fantasy Golf Bag member, everything here is global. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear out my favorites. So this will get us started fresh on a clean slate. This will refresh driving IQ. So now when I select players, when we go to approach IQ, we can see which ones kind of carry over or piggyback into approach IQ and driving IQ. All right. What do we want to do? 270, 290. We'll leave that in. 290 to 310. We'll try to be a little bit aggressive on nailing this down. I don't think, obviously he mentioned 2 holes that are going to be less than driver. That could be in the 270 to 290 category. It could be in the 250 to 270. I'll just do 270, 290 for now and just assume it's kind of less than driver, being, 3 woods, maybe a long iron that's getting close to 270. 290 to 310 looks like that's probably going to be the majority of them, but I'm also going to add in 310 to 330. And we'll get an idea of who's doing pretty well in those. Missed fairway penalty and distance penalty, I'm not going to mess with. I assume, to be honest, distance penalty is actually going to be pretty big at this event versus the last few events we've seen on the PGA Tour. I'm not going to bake it into the driving IQ model here, but I do think distance penalty, at least it sounds like, if you're going to be driving it less than the field average, you're going to have a tougher time for sure, whether that's a quarter of a shot or a 4/10 of a shot. We'll see how that kind of bakes out. But Driving accuracy, honestly, doesn't sound like that's going to be a big issue. I think we're just going to be simple here. We'll do stroke gained off the tee and driving distance, and we'll kind of weight those two. So if you guys haven't seen the new IQ model for driving IQ, we can actually build a matrix for all three of these buckets, which is pretty cool. So we'll do this, and this will get us kind of started. So if you're listening to the audio portion of this, we are going to go through like names. I'm going to walk through kind of the top guys in this tool and then in the approach IQ and kind of see which ones overlap. But if you're watching on video, obviously this is going to be pretty helpful for using this tool this week and next week for Oakmont. 270, 290. Let's just reset everything. There we go. So this is the default. 310 to 330. Probably not going to be a ton. Let's just keep it at like 25%. Let's bump 270 to 290 down to 15%. And that's probably, depending on the shorter than the less than driver holes, we could just be missing the boat here, but it still at least encompasses driving. And we would, honestly, we're just trying to capture guys that are driving it well in these specific buckets. And most of this is just driver heavy. So using a little extra won't hurt us. So let's bump this way up for 290 to 310. I think this is where the average is going to go for most holes. We'll bump that up to 60%. He mentioned that most of the drives are going to be, he mentioned 300 and 315. So we're pretty much in the ballpark there. So that's your weights on the driving distance buckets. And then the second piece of this is baking in the stats that you want to use for each of those buckets. So, driving distance has its place. Off the tee encompasses that. So we don't want to double count too much or overemphasize distance. So what we'll do is we'll do like a 70-30 split. I do think the distance is helpful. Certainly won't hurt. But I think if we do 70-30 on off the tee and then driving distance, that'll give us kind of the best all-around model for, what driving IQ can do for us. And then down here at the bottom, you can see how that breaks out. So like the biggest chunk in this model is 42% we're giving to 290 to 310 for strokes gained off the tee. So we'll run that and we'll get our model ranking right here. As always, I'll just preface this by whenever you're using our tools or any tools anywhere for PGA DFS is always just monitor the sample size. Ironically, Snedeker's sample size was short or small, however you want to phrase that, last week. And he looked good and he went off. So it can be good and bad. But generally speaking, I would be cautious and just kind of look into it a little bit more with smaller sample size. So the top guys, interesting, are, even Rory being such a good driver, he has not been the best in the 290. He's been good. So honestly, he's not been bad. But there's some guys that are cheaper that have been just as good off the tee. Now, when we bake in approach in the IQ tool, you'll see these guys possibly not even be in our top 20. And that's where you start to weed them out because we obviously want a combination of both, hence the combo IQ tool. But we'll go ahead and check these guys. We'll just do like the top 20, and I'll read these off for you. It's going to be a long-winded. I'll read off the top 10. I'll check the top 20. 1, 2, 3, 13, 14, 16. All right. So we'll read off the top 10 and then we'll do approach IQ. So like I said, this is super simple and you can just and once you get this and you run in like Stat Model Pro or whatever else you want to research on Fantasy Golf Bag, now we have the custom sims up so we can use this and then run our simulations and see which ones, are projecting out the best for DraftKings, FanDuel, or like tournament outrights, which is pretty cool. So you can customize that. But yeah, the top 10 is Nicholas Norgard, sitting really high. He's third in 270. Or I'm sorry, I'll talk about off the tee as our primary focus. So he's seventh off the tee, 270 to 290. He's number one off the tee, 290 to 310. He's 10th off the tee, 310 to 330. So pretty good combination. We have Jesper Svensson, our number 2 here. Taylor Pendrith, third. Michael Thorbjornsen, 4. Thomas Rosenmuller, 5. We got Rory, Keith Mitchell, Chris Goddard, Nikolai Hogard, and Trevor Cohn. Those are your top 10. Now, I checked everybody. Luke Clanton there at 11 is interesting. He's actually number one off the tee, 270 to 290. Smallish sample size, though, but obviously been very good over the last year or so. That is our rankings based on our buckets for this golf course. So pretty easy there. So now we're just going to hop into Approach IQ. We'll check off these names and we'll see how many actually have some crossover. So it sounds like, generally speaking, when we hop into Approach IQ, we're looking to mimic the golf course as closely as we can using either Spectrum approach, which I would prefer, or strokes gained approach. Being as if it's going to be long approach shots, and Eric kind of mentioned the primary focus was over 175. I think he said 175, right? Yeah, 8 approaches over 175 and 6 over 200. Let's just focus on that. We'll do, obviously baking in a little bit of the shorter wedge or the shorter irons wouldn't be a bad idea, but it seems like the focus here for the majority of every round is going to be in the mid and long iron. So 175 to 200 and 200 to 225. So we'll keep it nice and easy. We'll even bake in a little bit of 225 to 250. How about that? As always, we'll use fairway. We'll use par threes, which I consider fairway. I don't even consider that like we're looking at par 3 data. I use that as additional sample size for fairway shots, even though they have to tee it up. It's just looking at clean lies. It's what I view fairways as clean lies. So par threes, and I also include first cut. So you can always just use fairway. There's usually pretty good sample size with that, but adding a little more never hurts. So par threes and first cut. I'm going to use Spectrum approach. And actually, we'll use strokes gained approach. I will use Spectrum approach for the Combo IQ video. I would always recommend using Spectrum over strokes gained. But let's use Spectrum approach for this one since we use strokes gained off the tee in the DrivingIQ model. So it's kind of pulling together, I guess, with the same logic. So we got those 3 buckets. We have the rankings for those. It's interesting how poor Rory has been in those ranges. So we'll do a weighted ranking here. Pretty simple. 175 to 200. We'll do like 50%. Do 25. We'll do 30% actually, 200 to 225. And we'll do 20% for 225 to 250. It's probably a little bit high. So let's do like 60%. 15. Actually, we'll do 55. Perfect. Okay, this is what we got. So 175 to 200. We're gonna run it with 55% weight. 200 to 225 is a 30% weight, and 225 to 250 a 15% weight. Again, we're trying to be close. We don't know exactly what this data will look like this time next year, assuming they're coming back to this golf course, which it sounds like they are. But I think based on trusting Eric's opinion, I think this will be pretty close. So we'll apply the weights there. We'll get our new model ranking. Very different. And in fact, it did not even save. Perfect. So I will update that after we finish this podcast, but I will still read off the top 10. And I would check off the top 20 and see the overlap. But yeah, there's a big difference in the approach numbers. The guys that pop that I can already recognize, Nikolai Hogard. Rory is down a little bit, but still kind of in the top range. But I'll read off the top 10 for you. Let's see. Do I want to do percentile? Yeah, we'll do percentile. I prefer that anyways. Sample size looks pretty good for all these guys. So this will be pretty indicative of how they've been in these specific buckets. It is interesting to see guys that do poorly in, one category and well in another. Same with driving. Like some poor drivers do really well with their approach kind of because they have to. And then likewise, guys that drive it really well, like you think about Bryson, his approach numbers are typically poor. And he's Not been great, I will say that. But what we saw, post COVID when he really gained a bunch of distance is now his baselines have to go way up to gain strokes one approach, but he's also gaining so much off the tee that his baseline from 90 yards instead of 140 yards is now a lot closer. So he's still hitting it closer than everybody else, but his strokes gain will show you like, oh, he's losing strokes. He's still beating the field. So it goes hand in hand. Gaining the strokes off the tee, gaining strokes on approach. And honestly, with like par five scoring and stuff like that, around the green is used inside of 50 yards. That goes hand in hand as well. So generally speaking, tee to green is a great metric, especially if you're short on time. It grabs everything, but never look at one or the other completely independent of the other. It's very important to view it together. So the top guys with the approach buckets that we just looked at, and I actually want to look at last 12 events. We'll let that run. I'll rerun this. There we go. All right. So this is our last 12 events. So same sample as the off the tee numbers. So basically like the last 3 months, which is what I like to do. Antoine Rosner, number 1. Rory McIlroy, number 2. Matt McCarty, number 3. Nikolai Hogard, number 4, who was just in the off the tee numbers. So that looks pretty good. I think he's playing well. I think he's down in Florida for the U.S. Open qualifying. He shot 600, I think, in the first round. I'm not sure how he's doing this afternoon. But a pretty good fit right off the bat for Nikolai Hogard, and he's down there at 7,400. Mac Meissner, Alex Smalley, Sam Ryder, interesting. Carl Phillips, Chandler Phillips, and then we got Emiliano Grillo, and then John Pack down there. So those would be the guys that would be popping the most with the approach shots that they're going to have here. Now, you can look at like proximity. I just don't like using that because of the way it's just a straight average. And I've talked about this plenty of times before, but like looking at proximity as an average, it's literally 50 feet and 20 feet averages out, and 30 feet and 35 feet averages out, versus strokes gained approach. There's a little bit more of a logarithmic flow from really close gains a lot. And as you go further away, you lose less and less. So, hitting it to 40 feet and then 50 feet, it's not as big of a difference. But when you're talking proximity, every foot is basically equal, and it's a little bit skewed in my opinion when you just look at proximity. So, but you can do that. We do have those numbers as well, and you can run it and get the same model. It'll shift some guys around just a little bit, but mostly going to be, looks pretty close actually. Let's see here. Yeah, Rosner, McIlroy, McCarty, pretty close. I think Smalley bumped up. All in all, about the same. I think rankings-wise across those 3 buckets, it was pretty close. So nothing crazy there. So those are like the main guys that I would focus on. Like right off the bat, Nikolai Hogard would be someone I would have my focus on to start the week off. And obviously Rory does pretty well off the tee. There's not much you can do there. So like the interesting ones like Norgard, we just talked about Norgard with the driving. If you go down to where he is, we'll do rank. He's 46, so still pretty good. And honestly, he's 4th in proximity from 225 to 250. So Nicholas Norgard is probably an interesting one. It's difficult to find guys that are going to be really, really good in both, unless their name is Scotty Scheffler, Rory, Xander Schauffele, etc. So finding a guy like Nicholas Norgard, same with Nikolai Hogard, that do really well or pretty well in one of the buckets, and then you jump to approach IQ and they're reasonable in the next one, that's as good as you can get for the most part. Generally speaking, guys are going to be average and then really, really far down the list. And those are the tougher ones to kind of pinpoint. But yeah, Nicholas Norgard looks pretty good. We'll see what Norn's been doing. He's 23rd in proximity in those buckets. T39 last week, lost a little bit on approach per spectrum, about average. He's very good off the tee though. So seeing his approach numbers is actually intriguing He is 8,500 this week. So let's see where we want to go next. So let's go to the Stat Model Pro. We have our lead in. We have a couple statistics categories that are kind of pre-built. One of the ones I really like to look at is lead in stats. So the lead in stats kind of go hand in hand with our Course Preview Pro and the Time Machine, looking at like top 10 finishers and what their lead in form looked like. This is like a pretty good idea where you use strokes gained, green or regulation. We have birdie or better and bogey or worse. So like those all included make pretty good sense to kind of use as a whole. So we can run that too. That'll help us out a little bit. So let's quickly run. We'll bump down around the green to 0 actually for this case. Putting, probably use a little bit. Green and regulation, I always do like. Proximity, we'll take that out for now. If we were using approach IQ numbers, obviously proximity is okay. I would still rather use the strokes gained or spectrum data for approach. Now, birdie or better and bogey or worse are interesting. So like, I know people tend to want to gravitate towards one or the other. It goes hand in hand with strokes gained total, which is honestly, besides strokes gained tee to green, probably the most predictive stat, just from a strokes gained total leading to better, leading to the next round being strokes gained total. Like it's very consistent. Birdie or better and bogey or worse kind of worked hand in hand with that. So I would kind of keep that in the higher sides, like birdie or better, 15%, bogey or worse, 15% as well. So that leaves us with 83.3. Now we can bump up off the tee a bit. Bump that up. And then tee to green 10%, since we're already kind of double counting there. So now we can see what that looks like. And this should give us a good idea. So Luke Clanton's actually second, just with small sample size. But yeah, so Rory McIlroy number 1, no surprise there. I think generally speaking, if Rory or Scheffler, Xander hopefully soon is in the field, they should always be at the top of anything you build statistically. So Rory McIlroy 11,900 on DraftKings, number 1, sitting pretty good. We have Luke Clanton, Thorbjorn Olesen, been playing a good bit of him. Corey Connors, like that a lot. Obviously, all these statistics are kind of all encompassing of their ball striking and their scoring, using birdie or better and bogey or worse. So I do like that. Corey Connors, just expensive at 10-1. So you kind of have to make a decision. Like you could definitely build some nice balanced lineups with Connors, Lowry, Pendrith, who's phenomenal off the tee. Kevin Yu as well. Chris Goddard is up here. And then Nicholas Norgard right there. So this would be a really good avenue to start by, running the IQ tools, favoriting your players there, moving to Stat Model Pro. You can run the same stuff. You can add in some custom stats if you like, and then run that as well. But this is a pretty good idea right off the bat. Now, the one guy I want to talk about really quick is Aberg. So you can see here, doesn't rank out very well. Didn't really rank out great going into last week, but we saw some spectrum pops. He ended up having a really good round 2, pretty good round 2, and then really good numbers in round 4. But what I wanted to focus on down here is the spectrum numbers. So this is the recent performance trends chart on all of our player profiles. This gives you a split between their strokes gain data and their spectrum data. We have off the tee and approach. So like a big spike with off the tee is usually, especially if it's positive, like there's some guys go down the board and their strokes gain negative, their spectrum's negative, just less negative. Like, yeah, maybe that's something to look at or keep an eye on as they progress. Maybe it's trending up. But typically speaking, spectrum's a very good indicator of immediate success. And you can see his off the tee numbers are almost a stroke higher in the last 4 events, last 8, and almost the last 12. Really good off the tee numbers versus strokes gained. So that's great. Approach is a little bit different. Last week helped quite a bit, but I think this is where the edge would come with why we kind of went for Ludwig last week, trying to catch him a little bit early. I wish his price didn't go up, but it is what it is. Could just be a very interesting play as we go into Oakmont. But you can see here, honestly, he's losing zero point 0.2 shots on approach, and he's gaining almost 0.4. So over a half a shot difference with strokes gained to Spectrum data. So I do like to see that. So I would keep the pedal down on Aberg, or at least keep your eye on him. If we can get him cheaper, I don't think the pricing came out for US Open yet. And the ownership stays down, Aberg's a fantastic play to keep your eye on. Very good long iron player for this week. Great driver, and Spectrum likes his splits a lot for off the tee and approach. Over the last 4, last 8, and last 12, it's been very good. So keep your eye on Aberg. And with that being said, I think that's pretty much it. I will say for the live tournament stats, just a couple quick things. If you've hung around this long, I appreciate it. We'll talk through a couple of the updates that we have for Showdown. I think you guys will like this. And I think I'm going to do 1 or 2 shows this weekend as we get ready for the US Open next week for our Showdown sims. I think you guys will like this. But now we have all the breakouts for the tournament per round. So you can see the wave splits. This is all free, by the way. So you can go to live tournament stats at Fantasy Golf Bag. You get the strokes total, the scoring average total, and the wave by wave splits. Gives you an idea there, and also round by round. And then there's stats down below. The EAP data is a little bit more advanced. I won't jump into that. But the Showdown simulation. So this is what I'll probably do on Friday as we go into Saturday, and probably Saturday for the final round. But really cool update that we put in on Saturday or Friday last week, that now you can take for FanDuel or DraftKings, and you can run all your lineups straight from here. You have tee time, score, all the good stuff. You can favorite your players from our other tools, and then run your lineup. So pretty simple. Run as many as you want. We can run 50, run 500 or 1,000. We can do our min and maxes. So just like an optimizer, we'll generate our lineups. We'll hop into our lineups, see how they look. Okay, we can delete out or make some changes. You can check your exposures and update your targets for min and max as well. And then you can quickly run your simulations for those lineups. Get your win percentage, your top 5 percentage, export, upload, and you're good to go. What I do like to do, and that's what I'll focus on the video Friday and Saturday, is especially for FanDuel, since the ownership is a little bit loose with how guys play FanDuel slates, is what I like to do is I'll run the simulations here, delete out a bunch of lineups that basically aren't simming that well, and then resim these and then get that. So you would basically I would probably start with 500 lineups, sim them out, keep like the top 50, sim those, and then take the top 10 or 20, whatever you want to play, export those, and you can upload. So pretty cool there. And then the last thing really quickly is for the custom simulations. You guys can see this here. When you hop down to the bottom, you can run sims from our data for any of the slates: DraftKings Showdown, DraftKings Classic, FanDuel, and then tournament outcomes. And I'll keep it short. I'll just do 1,000 really quick. But you can make your edits to course difficulty, stuff like that, run your sims, and then you get your tournament outcomes, based on your customizations. And an error occurred. Fantastic. And then you can get your outcomes, compare that to Vegas odds, and get your bets. So we'll have head-to-heads and 3 balls in here as well. But that is the way to do it. There we go. So D-Clay Classic ran. We got Rory, Corey Connors, Aberg has a decent projection. We just ran 1,000, so this is pretty small as far as simulations go. But he gives you all these numbers: made cut, miscut, scoring if you want to kind of bump this up against underdog or prize picks, etc. And then you can export this and upload and use it for whatever you want. But I think that is it for now. The plan is US Open week coming up. We'll transition all of the field over on Friday when the final field comes out. I might preload a field on Thursday, but the final-ish field will be on Friday. And then all the course stuff, everything for Oakmont will be up, so we can dive into the Oakmont data and start to prepare for the Millie Makers in store next week. I think it's like a 5-year anniversary for the last guy that won the Millie Maker for the U.S. Open, at least. So pretty exciting. Always good to get the stronger fields with the pricing. I assume we'll be down to $5K, but we'll see how that shakes out. But yeah, obviously a fun run of events we got coming up. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Last couple of things, I guess. Make sure you go follow EPAC Golf on X, and then you can stay tuned for my Combo IQ video. And then obviously check out fantasygolfbag.com. I would encourage you guys to test out the tools prior to the US Open, especially with the Spectrum data and the new sims. I think you guys will really like it. So as always, you can reach out to me in the Discord, or you can message me on Twitter. Always happy to help. Best of luck this week for the RBC Canadian Open. We'll talk to you later. See ya.